Okay. Ooh, I did kind of an abrupt transition there. I'm trying to get this just right. We're still working on our production. So we have the transition, but it was a little sharp. Here we are, Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. That means it's the goRIA live stream. I'm Chuck Vela. And we have with us a repeat guest, Mark Schoeff Jr., who is a senior reporter that really covers the DC beat, as I like to say, for Investment News. Mark, welcome back to the live stream.
Thank you, Chuck. It's good to be here.
All right. Well, listen, with all the changes in the regulation in all industries, especially ours, you have a tremendous amount of job security, as we can see, right? There's no shortage of things for you to cover down there. But it seems like even though, we did a live stream maybe about a month and a half ago, about what's happening with DOL and a fiduciary, it seems like even in that relatively short period of time, there's even more new stuff coming down the pike. Can you bring us up to speed? What's happening with that?
Sure, Chuck. Thanks for having me here today. The last time we spoke, I believe the DOL retirement security rule proposal, that's DOL's term, retirement security, was pending. The proposal was at the Office of Management and Budget. It was already being attacked by the insurance industry. And since then, it has been released. It was released on October 31, published in the Federal Register on November 3rd, and the public comment period ends January 2nd. The proposal was presented with great fanfare by a White House event that starred President Biden himself. So essentially, presidents talk about investment advice directly once a decade. President Obama talked about it when his DOL released its version of what was called the fiduciary rule, and now President Biden talked about investment advice when he released his administration's version of the DOL fiduciary rule on October 31st. So that's where we are today. The Biden rule does differ from the Obama rule in various ways, but you would never know that. For the most part, from the rhetoric that surrounds it, the financial industry looks to be united against the rule, saying that it would sharply increase regulatory costs and legal exposure for brokers and insurance agents. The Biden administration is promoting the rule as a way to curb conflicts of financial advisors, conflicts of interest that lead to what the Biden administration calls junk fees that erode nest eggs. The rule would impose a fiduciary standard essentially on all advice to retirement savers, regardless of whether the advisor giving it is an investment advisor, a broker, or an insurance agent, and it would apply to one-time recommendations of rollovers. It also would apply to insurance products that aren't investments. Those two areas are key expansions of the definition of fiduciary that the Biden administration wants to accomplish.
All right. Well, I was taking some notes here. There's two things there that really strike me. Number one, and I noticed this myself, that this is coming from the president's mouth himself, right? And that doesn't happen too often. I didn't realize it was kind of a once in a decade type of thing, but it has been. Yeah. So that's a big deal, right? So if it bubbles up to, that level of government, it's clearly top of mind for the government, right? And that means it should be top of mind for us. And the other note I made here was, because I was thinking, what is, and you know my views on this, right? If you're going to give advice, be a fiduciary. If you're going to be a salesperson, just say, hey, I'm selling your product. I'm not giving you advice. And I think that's fine too, whoever would want that, but okay. But as far as the increased costs, here's a question I have, if you could answer this. Are those costs, in other words, is the argument from, the non-RIA side of things, I think, it's going to cost more to keep this in compliance with regulations, because essentially you have a system that's not necessarily built for fiduciary care trying to be fiduciaries. Would they be able to avoid those costs if they're just like, we're fiduciaries? What would you say about that?
Well, the reason as far as I understand their argument, the reason they don't want to say we're fiduciaries is they don't want to take on the legal liability that entails. This all revolves around the threat of being sued by an investor, uh, with that investor claiming that the broker didn't act in her best interests in recommending an annuity for her retirement account, or recommending some other investment that then went south on her. And it really, the hangup is the legal liability. The brokerage industry doesn't want to take that on. That's why one of the reasons they like regulation best interest, because it has the best interest words.
Yeah, right.
But it is not, in fact, a fiduciary standard. I know fiduciary is defined
Mhm.
as having to act in the client's best interest. Well, best interest was co-opted by regulation best interest, without regulation best interest being a fiduciary standard. There are still two different standards: best
Yeah.
interest for brokers and fiduciary for advisors, investment advisors. Now, the SEC, even under a Democratic leader, Gary Gensler, is not redoing regulation best interest, but it is trying to bring fiduciary and Reg BI closer together in the guidance that it puts out on Reg BI, and in the way that it, presumably the way that it will enforce Reg BI. But here's where the DOL fiduciary rule comes in. There are certain aspects of investment advice that Reg BI does not cover. One is uh, insurance products that are not securities.
Hmm.
The big example of that is fixed index annuities.
Hmm.
Those are not defined as securities products. Those are insurance products that are regulated by state insurance commissions. And Reg BI does not touch those. Reg BI also, although Reg BI does apply to rollovers, you know, it's kind of a fuzzy area there.
Hmm.
Brokers are supposed to adhere to Reg BI when they're making recommendations on rollovers, but what the DOL rule would do is subject those rollover recommendations to the fiduciary standard that's encompassed in federal retirement law, known as ERISA.
Hmm.
So it would actually be a fiduciary standard, at least when it comes to retirement accounts. So the 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 expansion into insurance products is a hangup for the insurance industry. The expansion of fiduciary into insurance products is a hangup for the insurance industry, and this idea that brokers all of a sudden would be subject to a fiduciary rule when dealing with retirement savers is a hangup for brokerages. So I don't think it's just, obviously it's not as simple as a broker just saying, okay, I'm a fiduciary, or else they wouldn't be putting up this kind of fight, I don't believe.
Absolutely. And again, I'm always just flabbergasted. It's like, second to physical health, right? Your financial health is a pretty darn close second.
Mhm.
And to have what is clearly perceived by the client, in my opinion, as advice, to really not be advice. And for me, advice is only in your best interest. If it's not advice in your best interest, you're selling a product, right? You're someone on a car sales lot, and you know you're dealing with a salesman, and you know that salesperson is going to just tell me the good things about that car. So be it. We know that person's a salesperson. But if my doctor's giving me advice, my lawyer's giving me advice, my accountant's giving me advice, my financial advisor, if they're giving me advice, I have to be able to rely that that's advice given in my best interest. I say this somewhat facetiously. I mean, I don't see how this is still a debate. Clearly, there's a lot of money at stake, but my gosh, how can they even say that investment advice should not be investment advice, not sales, but advice should be fiduciary?
I hesitate to speak for the financial industry, but
Hmm.
because they're not on this telecast or podcast, because they're not on this live stream, let
Yeah.
me try to channel their arguments.
Yes.
What they would say is that a broker or an insurance professional is in fact trying to do what's best for her customers, and that what this DOL fiduciary rule would do is force them to abandon middle and low income savers, those with modest assets, because the assets aren't big enough to essentially justify the fiduciary level of regulation that would be imposed. And they say, look at RIAs who have $250,000 account minimums at the low end, or a million, up to $1 million account minimums. These RIAs are putting those account minimums so high because they're fee based, and they need to be that high to make money on those accounts. And the brokerage industry is saying these brokers, and the insurance industry is saying the insurance agents are just charging commissions on these recommendations, and it's much lower cost for investors, and therefore these commissions are actually good for investors. And if you impose fiduciary duty, we can't charge commissions anymore. And in fact, the DOL fiduciary rule, in order for a broker to charge a commission or an insurance agent to charge a commission under the fiduciary rule, he would have to meet impartial conduct standards and other requirements that allow him to charge that commission. And those meeting those standards is what is going to raise the cost of giving that advice, the industry would say. I believe I'm channeling the industry correctly.
Fair enough.
And again, I want to make clear that's what the industry says. It's not what Mark Schoeff says. I'm repeating what they say.
Absolutely. No, and that's valid as far as that probably is the argument they would come up with. And boy, I tell you what, off the record on this public broadcast. But seriously, if you know of anyone in the financial services sector that would like to take that argument, and this is not in an adversarial way, I would really like to understand it better right from, if you will, the horse's mouth. Pass along my name. I'd love to have them on and have this very cordial discussion, unlike what we see in the Senate. If you saw that recently, that was just unbelievable. You keep wondering, is this like the United States or some third world country we're watching sometimes? But it would be a very cordial discussion, but I would love to hear their argument, beyond just your channeling it on their behalf. And I appreciate you doing that. But here's what I would say. So, okay. And look, I have minimums. That's valid, right? I mean, but is the answer to that, instead of charging, my 1% to 0.5%, which is my fee, I need to receive a 5% commission to give you advice on something. And that advice is going to be limited to just those things that pay a 5 or 6 or 7. And in the old days, 10, 12% commission. That doesn't seem like a great answer either. There's certainly a lot of younger advisors that are working on a lower cost and lower minimum. I mean, I'll tell you what, I've been doing this for 30 years. My first account was not $1 million account, right? I was opening up the $5,000 Roths on a fee basis, and it's hard, to do that. But there are pathways for advisors to take on smaller clients as they build. And maybe we'll do a show on this too, but there's some resources that I'm actually looking at right now for what we call our KOCs, right? Kids of clients, that allows them to essentially do like a do-it-yourself, or if you will, guided do-it-yourself. And that allows us to deliver fiduciary advice on a fee basis at a very low cost, in a way where they're taking up some of the time I would take to data enter. There are solutions beyond just, charging 5 to 10% commissions. And as I say, I appreciate you're channeling the industry on this. But if you know someone that would love to come on the show in a very respectful discussion type of way, please pass it on, because I would like to hear better on that. And I think as an industry, we could do better than, okay, if we're going to give advice to people with fewer means, the solution is not to charge them more. And not only charge them more, but charge them in a way that's opaque. That's probably my biggest issue, right? And I find that there are certain products, I like to call them the use it or lose it, like the term life policies, the long-term care policies, the disability policies, that the insurance industry has yet to come up with a fee-based or commission-free solution. Okay, I think that might happen at some point. But up until that point, how about at a minimum, just disclose clearly to the client, here's how much I'm receiving as commission. Who can argue against that?
It's interesting that you say this, Chuck, because a member of Congress in the debate yesterday on amendments to a DOL funding proposal that would kill this fiduciary rule. Said, hey, the DOL bureaucrats shouldn't be able to meddle with commissions because commissions are disclosed and commissions are required in a competitive industry like the brokerage industry. And on top of that, clients agree to those commissions. This is what
Do
the
they?
member of Congress said.
Yeah.
Now, and I'll quote him at greater length in an upcoming column because it was an interesting argument there. You had this unfolding on the House floor last night. But if RIAs like you, Chuck, want to influence whether this proposal becomes a final rule, I would encourage you to provide examples of how you help clients with modest amounts of assets
Hmm.
while continuing to collect fee-based commission, because that is exactly the argument that's used against this proposal by the financial industry. And perhaps they make valid arguments, perhaps they don't. It really depends on who you ask.
Hmm.
But RIAs have to demonstrate that they can help Main Street investors, not just Main Street investors who also happen to be wealthy, but true Main Street investors. And I know there are some advisors who try to do that through hourly fees or subscription fees and so forth. They try to stay away from the AUM percentage because the AUM percentage really only adds up if there's a lot of AUM.
Hmm.
That's a given. But if you want to get involved in this debate,
Yeah.
do so by really homing in on that idea of helping a middle income investor and doing it with fiduciary status, because that's what this is. This whole debate is once again revolving around that. It's like Groundhog Day. We're going through it again. We did it with the Obama rule. We're going to do it again with
Hmm.
the Biden rule.
I tell you what, challenge accepted. I have a call literally as I look on my calendar here tomorrow afternoon to finalize how we're going to do exactly that. Now, we're doing this mainly for what we like to call our KOCs, our kids of clients, right? So these are people that are important to us because they're important for our overall firm and our clients who we value greatly. But do they need, a 30-year experienced CFP at, $400 or $500 an hour? No, they really don't. So what we're developing is essentially this hybrid do-it-yourself type of
Mhm.
model, which frankly, a lot of these younger clients would want anyhow. That's advisor assisted. That reduces the amount of time I need to personally be involved because it's more software based. And that allows me to deliver a guided solution at a lower cost that they could afford in a way that makes sense to me and still be a fiduciary. So challenge accepted. Once we get that nailed down, I'll share with you offline how that is. And I tell you what, I would love the opportunity to be involved in and demonstrate to anyone that will listen. Yes, it is possible to be a fiduciary for these smaller clients. Now, here's the thing I would leave, and then we probably have to wrap this up. And this happened last time too. This is supposed to be like 10 or 15 minutes, but we talked for so much because there's so much to talk about on this.
Right.
But here's what I would say. At some point, if you're giving advice, you're selling your time and experience for sure, but it's really time that you're selling. What's your time worth? So if you sell someone a $10,000 whole life policy, right, and you're
Yeah.
making $1,500 and it took you about 45 minutes, are you saying that you're worth $2,000 an hour or whatever that works out to be? I don't know that you are, right? I think a good advisor, and this is also depending on where you are in the United States, right? Cost of living and all this, $200 to $500 an hour, I think is fine, right? And can we not help these smaller clients with 2 hours worth of guidance per year for $1,000? You can't do that? I bet you can, right? Or do you want to not spend 2 hours? Would you rather spend 30 minutes filling out an annuity application and make three times that for a quarter of the time? That's what I would put out there. But I will get back with you offline, and maybe we'll turn
Mhm.
that into a podcast or a live stream and demonstrate to the powers that be is like, yeah, you sure can be a fiduciary, earn a respectable living, and deliver respectable advice. And wouldn't that be nice to see?
DOL has scheduled a public hearing on this proposal for December 12th, I believe it is. They just announced it today, so you might want to put your name in. It's an online hearing. You might want to put your
Oh,
name in as a witness or try to become a witness. I'm not sure how that works, but
yeah,
you could contact EBSA, the Employee Benefits Security Administration, and try to
yeah,
get on the list. Before we wrap up, though, I'll just say that in the last 24 hours, there have been a few developments. One is these amendments to the Department of Labor funding bill in the House would kill the proposal. However, those policy writers, as they're called, have a really difficult legislative path ahead. It's not clear the House itself is going to approve the larger bill that they're in, and the Democratic Senate is almost certainly going to reject those policy writers. So it doesn't look as if the opponents will be able to kill the rule through legislative means. The Department of Labor today rejected the industry's call for an extension of the comment period on the proposal, which is a way to delay it to death. So the comment deadline is still January 2nd. And it looks like this is down the road, is just going to end up back in the courts, basically.
yep. And around we go. And I think we left or came to that same conclusion last time, which ultimately I believe this is on the industry to create the education for the clients to understand the difference, as I like to say, between a real planner, right, a fiduciary planner, and a
Mhm.
Pinot planner in name only, right? So it's that education that I think is going to be critical because I think we're both going to be long retired, Mark, by the time this if it ever becomes a
Yeah.
real thing. So education is going to be key, I think, still.
You're right. Education not only for investors but also for lawmakers and regulators.
Exactly. All right. Well, Mark Schoeff, as always, thank you so much for joining us. This is really evolving into a regular segment. And as I said, with all that's going on in DC, you've got tremendous job security. And it's a real privilege to have you on the show as often as we do. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you, Chuck. It was a pleasure.
All right, real good. All right, so that's it for this week's live stream, which really is about a podcast. Looking at the time here, which is even better. So, on behalf of Investment News and goRIA, I'm Chuck Vela. Thanks a lot for joining us, and we'll see you here same time, same bat channel next week, 3 o'clock on the next coming Wednesday. I don't know the date, but Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern. We'll be back here. Thanks for joining us. See you next time. Take care. See you, Mark.
Bye, Chuck.